Thank you for your interest in the Jason Foundation, Inc. and our programs for awareness and prevention of youth suicide. All of the Jason Foundation's programs have been designed to follow the guidelines of our mission statement, dedicated to the prevention of the silent epidemic of youth suicide through educational and awareness programs that equip young people, educators, youth workers, and parents with the tools and resources to help identify and assist at-risk youth. Since the time these materials were produced, our affiliates, community partners, etc. may have changed, bringing more diversity and support to JFI. For an up-to-date list of our supporters, please visit the JFI website, www.jasonfoundation.com. Also, statistical information supplied in these programs may be different from when the programs were filmed. For updated national and state statistics, please visit the Centers for Disease Control website, www.cdc.gov. You will find a wealth of knowledge about suicide and specifically youth suicide on their website. If you are facilitating a presentation using the enclosed materials, please share the above information with your audience. Periodically, we may add a section to the video supplying updates. Again, thank you for joining us in the fight against youth suicide.
What can you expect today? I think that's important, and we always want you to know that. First of all, this is not to make you an expert on youth suicide. I've been dealing in this field for 17 years now. I have a master's degree in education and counseling, and I wouldn't call myself an expert. In fact, I get a little nervous when somebody introduces me as Clark Flatt, the president of the Jason Foundation and an expert in youth suicide. That's something that people lose a little too loosely, I think. Or this is not intended to make you a crisis counselor. We don't want even to think that once you get through the training, you're a counselor at all. We wanted to equip you with the information, tools, and resources that will better enable you to identify a young person who might be dealing with issues of suicidal ideation, and not only be able to identify that young person, but be able to know how to assist that young person. Where can I go in my community? What should I do? What shouldn't I do? And hopefully we can equip you with those things. At the end of this seminar, if we can build a healthy awareness of the issue of youth suicide, if we do nothing else but after this, you have now an understanding of the impact of youth suicide and how we can start addressing that, then we've been successful in this seminar. I want to begin today, though, however, with a brief introduction of the Jason Foundation. For those that will be watching this and for you that in the audience that are not aware of us, who we are, because I think that's important when you see the information that we're providing and that we'll be sharing with you today. To tell you about the Jason Foundation, I have to tell you first of all about Jason, my son Jason. Now, if this had been in earlier years, I'd have pulled out my billfold and let those vinyl pictures fall down, and I'd walk around to you. Have you ever had some of those older ones in the audience? When somebody says, hey, do you have children? And we'd let those vinyl things fall out of our billfold. And each picture would have a story. And by sharing that story, you get to know my kids. And by getting to know my kids, then you sort of feel like we're part of a family, or at least we're acquaintances. We're becoming that friendship type of thing. Well, you can't even find those vinyl things anymore. And the only way we could do it is put it on a phone and pass it around, and we can't do that today. So I put a few pictures up on our PowerPoint for you. You can look at different stages in his life. There's a story behind each one of them. My favorite one is the bottom and in the middle. If you're too far away, you can't see it, but Jason was a mischievous little kid. You know, and you can see in his eyes there, he's waiting. When I took the picture, he's saying, as soon as Dad turns away, this life preserver's coming off. And I'm going to have some real fun in the water. Jason was your all-American kid. Let me explain what I mean by all-American. All-American doesn't mean he was the valedictorian. He wasn't the straight-A kid. He was more like me. I was all through my high school and college and even my master's program. Well, through college, I was a BC student. And now at the master's program, they didn't tell me that you had to have all Bs till I got there. That was a struggle for me. I want you to know I was a solid BC one and solid B once the master program, but I had to work really hard. Jason was a lot like me. He was a BC student. In fact, if he came home with more than 1 or 2 A's, I got suspicious. There was something going on. He was well liked. He was a better than average athlete. His older brother was a good athlete. His older brother was a quarterback. but he became a better than average athlete because he had to work at it. He treated it just like academics. You know, he was in the weight room, he was in the film room, he studied his opponents, he did everything he could to be that better than average athlete. Jason was that kid that we all have known someone like him. If he was in the weight room, it was because he was cutting through there as the shortest distance from one point to the other at the school. If he was in the film room, it was because that was dark and cool and he could take a nap. But on Friday night, you give him the football, and he was a natural. It just came to him. He didn't have to work at it. No telling how good he could have been if he worked at it. He had a lot of friends, very active in his church, no drug or alcohol problems, just what I would call your typical 16-year-old All-American kid. That was till July the 16th, 1997. In my previous life, I owned an insurance company. I had owned it for 23 years before starting the Jason Foundation. This was a day that I was at my office at the insurance company, early in the morning, about mid-morning. I was in a very important meeting with a banker, and all at once my secretary paged me. And she said, one of Jason's friends is on the phone. Now, most of you are too young, or some of you are parents out there, that when someone calls and it's a friend of one of your son or daughter, your first thing is something wrong? And that was my question. Is something wrong? Find out and let me know. My secretary got back and said, well, no, nothing's wrong. They just wanted to talk. I said, wanting to talk? Here I have an important meeting going on with a banker and they're wanting to talk. But I against my better judgment, I said, well, put them on through. I'll talk to her for a minute. And I got on the phone and sure enough, it was a conversation about nothing. Mr. Flatt, hey, it's a hot day out there. Well, yes, it's July the 16th in Nashville, Tennessee. It's hot. I bet you're working hard. Yes, I was working hard. And yeah, I've got a lot of things going on here. And says, well, I guess you're busy. And, I said, yes, I am busy. That went on for about 10 or 15 minutes. And finally, I found a spot in between the conversations that I said, well, listen, it was really nice of you to call. Jason, if he calls in, I know he said he's going to meet you guys down at the lake later on. I'll tell him you called and you're looking forward to seeing him. And I said, thank you for calling. And then they said, oh, well, just before you get off, have you heard from Jason? And I said, well, I talked to him this morning as I left the house. As I was leaving the house, it was his day off from his summer job at the local marina where he was making his money for his gas money and his date money. I shot a few hoops with him. I told her, I said, I even won today. I had to cheat. I had to foul him, but I won. And I said, I left there saying, I'll see you later. And he wanted to know if he could use the wave runner to take it down to the friends this afternoon. And I gave him permission. So I said, if I hear from him, I'll tell him you called. He said, well, please do that. And so we got off the phone. Everybody knows of the scientific fact of women's intuition. Women have that extrasensory perception that's out there. Without having facts, you just know it. It's there. But for those that are in the audience that are parents or will be a parent someday, let me tell you about another type. It's called parents' intuition. When something just gnaws up into your stomach and your son or daughter can be 2,000 miles away, you don't know what it is, but you know something's not right, something's amiss, something's wrong. That's what happened when I got off that phone. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Why did this person just call me out of the blue wanting to know if Jason had called me or talked to me? And it got so bad, I finally told the banker that I was meeting with, I said, I tell you what, you stay here for a minute, I need to go out. And I told my secretary to get Jason on the phone and I wanted to talk to him. Now you got to remember, this is 1997. 1997, cell phones are not those little things that we carry on our side. 1997, if you had a cell phone, it was about the size of a suitcase. And that was just a battery pack. You had to have another pack for the phone itself. So I told her to call him at home. And I went back to my meeting. 10 minutes went by and she still hadn't interrupted me. I went out and excused myself, said, hadn't you called Jason? I've called several times, left messages on your answering service. He hadn't called back. I said, okay, I tell you what, page him. I told you I owned my own insurance company. I was upper middle income at that time. I tell you what, so I took and put pagers on both my boys. Now you have to think about this. You don't realize that in 1997, if you were 16 years old and you had a pager, you were hot stuff at that time. And so I had pagers on both my boys. I said, page him. When he calls in, I want to talk to him. Went back to my meeting. 10, 15 minutes went by, still no phone call. I said, okay, I tell you what, this had happened before, especially with Jason. His older brother a little more responsible about calling back. So I wasn't too concerned. I said, I tell you what, put in our secret code. See, we had a family meeting. This had happened before, and the answer I'd got was, Dad, I was so busy, or what I was doing was very important for me. I said, okay, if you get this special code, emergency code, in front of a phone number, it means no matter how important what you're doing is to you, you stop what you're doing and you call, because Mom or Dad needs you. Now, we had a family meeting. We agreed upon that code. I can share it with you and those watching in the future on this, because we don't use those pagers anymore. The code was 911. Pretty smart, wasn't it? 911 plus a phone number. So we put the 911 number and I sent it out, and even at Jason, to make sure, his older brother, Jason, I gave him one of my business cards and I taped a quarter to the back of it. Now, those of you who are younger saying, why did you put a quarter on the back of your business card? Some of us at this older in the audience, let's tell everybody else, why did you put a quarter on the back?
Payphones.
Payphones, the relics they are. And so he had the quarter, he had his pager. I knew any minute I'd get a phone call. After 15 minutes went by, no phone call. I wasn't concerned, I was angry. I went out and told my secretary, we stopped the meeting with my banker. I said, I'm going to go find Jason. And it wasn't because of concern, I was angry. Called him at home, paged him with the emergency number, gave him a quarter that he had to call. He had it, and he still hadn't called me. So I went looking for him. I went down to where he worked, didn't think he would be there because it was a marina. If you showed up and they needed somebody, they were likely to put you to work, and Jason knew that, so he wouldn't go anywhere close to that on his day off. But I went there first. It was closest to my office. Secondly, I went down to the lake where his friends were, and they were wondering where he was at. They hadn't seen him. He was supposed to bring one of the wave runners. So I decided I would go home looking for him. The last thing I told him that morning was, don't forget to cut the yard. He was the youngest of the two. It was his job to cut the yard. And I said, when I get home, I want to make sure the yard is cut. And he knew that I got home at 6:30, almost on the nose every night. What he would do when it was his turn to cut the yard, he would wait till about 6:25 and get on the riding mower and go to the far end of the yard, knowing I wouldn't walk down there to get him. But surely on July the 16th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he wasn't cutting the yard. But it was the last place I knew to look. As I pulled into my house and looked up the driveway, I saw his car. Now, this doesn't mean much to you, but it meant a whole bunch to me. Jason had just turned 16 3 months prior to this. He got this old third hand-me-down car, but it was his pride and joy. He loved that car. It never got far from his sight. So if the car was there, it meant that he was close by. It was almost a revelation to me as I started up the driveway. I said, I know what's happened. I got that phone call from one of his good friends. And it's probably had an interpersonal relationship problem between him and this friend. And I said, I tell you, if Jason got upset, he would handle it a lot of times by putting headsets on and listening to music by laying on his bed. If he had had his headsets on listening to music, he wouldn't hear the telephone ring. If he hadn't left the house, he hadn't put his pager on. Made perfect sense why he hadn't answered the phone. So I went from being angry to saying, I think it might be time for a tailgate party. Now, what we said in our family, a tailgate party, was I had a pickup truck that sat out back, and we'd let the tailgate down. That's where me and my two boys, we would go out there either as together or individually, and we'd talk about girls, family, sports, anything that us guys wanted to talk about. That was our tailgate party. And I thought it might be time for Jason and I to have a tailgate party if there was this interpersonal relationship issue going on. And so I went into the house wanting to surprise him. I knew if he'd be laying in his bed, he'd have his headsets on, his eyes closed, listening to music. I wanted to go up to him and I would grab his big toe, how I'd wake him up every morning. I would grab his big toe and start "This Little Piggy Went to Market." That gets you out of bed, I want to tell you. And I said, I'll grab his toe, and as soon as I get one or two toes on it, he'll be taking his headsets off, throwing them down, hollering, "Dad, what are you doing?" And then he'll run me down the hall. We'll wrestle for a minute. Then I'll say, "Let's get a Coke and go outside, son. Let's talk and just see what's going on in life." I went in the house, looked down the hallway. Sure enough, his light was on. I knew I was right. As I started down the hallway, I knew it was about 3 or 4 steps from the door in the hallway to his bed, and I wanted to make those steps pretty quick. I wanted to surprise him. And so I got closer to his door, I got faster. Then I sort of almost edged up against the door to cut very quickly around it to make those 3 steps to his bed. As I turned and went into his bedroom, I fell on top of my son's body. He had taken my .38 caliber pistol that I had locked up until he was 14 years old. I knew the dangers of having a weapon that's openly available to young people. But after 14, I knew that he was no longer a threat. He didn't even like to hunt. He didn't like to be around weapons. So I stopped locking it up. He had stood in front of his bed. He had written 2 notes, put the gun behind his right ear, thinking he would fall straight back, and he pulled the trigger. However, the force of the .38 dum-dum coming out of the left side of his head was so great, it had spun him completely around, and he had fallen across the threshold of his bedroom door. So as I turned to go in quickly to those 3 or 4 steps, I stumbled and fell on top of my son. I still remember to this day, even though now it's been 17 years, I remember picking up his wrist and trying to feel a pulse. And I don't know how to do that, still don't know how to do that. I remember sitting down beside him and taking his head and putting it in my lap and pulling his eyelid back because I'd seen it done on TV, hoping that he would just start laughing at me and saying, "Dad, boy, I caught you, I surprised you." But all the time I knew at that point that Jason had become what we call a statistic to the silent epidemic of youth suicide. I knew he was no longer with us. I wish I could tell you that I got up at that point in time and said, we're going to start the Jason Foundation and we're going to address this terrible thing called youth suicide. But I have to say, one of the toughest things I have to do as president of the Jason Foundation, we work with a lot of law enforcement across the country. Law enforcement officers who know how to handle that scene, but they really don't know what to say to a mom or dad at that point where they've lost a son or daughter. And they hand out our cards to call, not as counselors, not as therapists, but just talk to someone who knows where you are at today. I get probably 3 to 5 phone calls a week where the first thing I hear across the phone is, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I just lost my son. I just lost my daughter." That's a tough conversation to have. But after losing him, it was a time that you just sort of feel a lot of guilt. You feel a lot of, why did this happen to me? Why did this go on? And you're sort of just floating around. Luckily, I had some people that stayed after me. They stayed after me and started to say, "Clark, can you understand what happened? What went on with Jason?" I have to say I didn't know. I just kept up, and I remember shouting out that to one of my friends, "Yes, I know he took my gun and shot himself." He said, "But do you understand this thing about suicide?" See, what I had in my mind, suicide was something that didn't happen to families like mine. You know, upper middle income or middle income families, this didn't happen. You know, families where you had the mom, the dad, you had the families, you had the dog, the cat, the complete family that was there. It just didn't happen to us. After my friends stayed on me, I finally remember one day I went in and I went to my old Radio Shack computer that was in my office, state of the line in 1997. And I typed in, I went into the old AOL. I had to sign in where you had that little buzzing sound. That was high tech in 97 too. And when it came up, I typed in simply youth suicide. I still remember to this day what came up. The first thing that came up when I put youth suicide in was from the Center for Disease Control. It said youth suicide was then the 3rd leading cause of death for young people ages 15 to 24 in our nation. I have to say, when I saw that stat, that's when the Jason Foundation really started. When I saw that it was now the 3rd leading cause of death for our young people, and the thing that did take my son's life. You see, as a parent, I had gone to every PTA, every PTO that had been offered about drugs, alcohol, even a form of bullying in 1997 I had gone to. I had went to all these different things to be able to make sure I had provided the safety that I could for my 2 boys, that I could give them the best chances of having a good and exciting life. I had gone to all these, and some of those things were not too exciting to sit through, some of these PTOs. So some of you that got that ahead of you, those PTO and PTA meetings sometimes weren't all that great. I remember one person that came up just to show you what we'll do for your kids. We had a sheriff that showed up, and he was going to teach us about drugs. So he opened up one of these tall cabinet things and had all these little drawers in it and had different color pills and things, and he was spreading them out with the names of them. And the thing was, we were learning what these different drugs look like, so as parents, we would see them possibly in our sons or daughters' pockets when we were cleaning them out, and we would say, I need to be concerned. And we could identify this. Now you have to remember, this was probably in the mid-'80s. Marijuana was just coming really big on the scene. we had this sheriff, and just make like you guys was us, we had this sheriff then say, okay, we got to know about marijuana. How many of y'all know how marijuana smells? I want you to raise your hand. Now you've got to think, this was a sheriff asking the question. Nobody was going to raise their hand. Oh, I know what it smells like, sir. And I'm not making little of it, but everybody sat there with their hands down. Well, this really excited this sheriff. He said, you got to know what it smells like. Your kids come home with it on their clothes, that smell of it, then you'll know that they're fooling with this terrible thing and you need to get them help. So he pulled out an aluminum ashtray and he put a little marijuana in it and he lit it and he fanned it and got it smoking some. Then he said, okay, everybody who don't know what it smells like, I want you to file around the table and smell it. Well, after about the fourth time around the table, he caught on to us. He caught on to it. The things we do for our kids, and I'm not making light of marijuana, but it was just funny what we would go through, and those things we would set through to protect our sons and daughters. But in Jason's 16 years, and his older brother 19 years at that time, no one had ever offered a seminar on youth suicide awareness and prevention, despite the fact it was the third leading cause of death for young people ages 15 to 24 at that time, and was the thing that took my son's life. So actually the incident was July the 16th, but the original start of the Jason Foundation was October of 1997. In October of 1997, we launched the Jason Foundation with a simple mission to provide programs for parents. That's the only thing we were looking for. We wanted to give parents a program that would help them learn how to identify the warning signs of suicidal ideation. Not only identify those warning signs, but know how to react to those, how to assist a young person who might be having issues. So the Jason Foundation was launched in October of 1997. Fast forward to today so we don't use all of our time talking about us. Today we started out literally on a kitchen table. In fact, at our corporate office in Hendersonville, Tennessee, we still have that kitchen table. It's something that we can look back on. But now today we're one of the largest youth suicide prevention programs in the nation. We have currently here in September of 2014, we have 65 what we call community resource centers located across the country that provides our programs. One of the unique things about the Jason Foundation, as you learn more about us and learn about our programs at the end, is that we do not sell anything. If we contract to do our programs with you as a church, as a school, as a community, or as a state, we do not charge for any of our programs, support, or follow-ups for those programs. And we'll learn more about that in a few minutes. We have programs that are used in all states. We have actually a physical program, a physical office in 26 states, 26 out of our 50. We have averaged over the last 4 or 5 years, we've averaged over 1 million. Last year, we had 1.5 million go through one or more of our programs. And so for the past 3 years, we have averaged over 1 million people. Our mission statement, instead of putting something up and reading you, I'm just going to paraphrase. It's very simple. We know that there's 3 groups that have to be addressed. We have to address our young people themselves. They see the changes in their friends way before anybody else. We have to address the educators, the youth workers, and the parents and communities. Our mission as a Jason Foundation is to provide the information, tools, and resources that will equip all 3 groups of those people. We'll equip them with the information, tools, and resources to be able to identify, and not only be identified, but know how to assist at-risk youth for suicide. The Jason Foundation is really, when you look at our corporate office and on our website, is not just a building. We're a collaboration of affiliates, and I always want to share our affiliates because it's our affiliates and our people that work with us that really make our programs good and makes them available to people across the nation at no cost. Our national spokesperson, you might recognize for those since we're here in Tennessee doing this, is Philip Fulmer. He came on with us in 1998 as our national spokesperson, a position that he still holds today. Philip came on and was probably the most instrumental person at helping us to expand outside of Tennessee. Within 3 years, we had almost every SEC coach working with us to expand our programs for parents and then also students in their respective states, something that got us out there and really outside of Tennessee. And it's a position that Coach Fulmer still holds with us today. Charlie Daniels, a country music icon, member of the Grand Ole Opry for those into country music, but also very instrumental in working with us through our military programs, working with us through our public service announcements. Very, very energetic individual that's helping us get the message about youth suicide awareness and prevention out. And of course, as you see, we also have Rascal Flatts as one of our celebrity spokespersons. Rascal Flatts started with us about 4 years ago. They came to us and said, what can we do to help in youth suicide awareness and prevention? First was just PSAs, awareness, talking about it in their concerts. Now we do a whole program. It's called B1. You can go to our website, Jason Foundation, or you can go to rascalflattsb1.com. It's a very positive peer support program. It's one they promote across the nation for us. It says a friend can make all the difference in the world. Be one. It's a very positive program. It's got their posters. We have a lot of schools that are using that, churches, any type of youth organization. So we're very glad to have Rascal Flatts working with us also. Our national affiliates, and we're almost through about the Jason Foundation, but I never go anywhere without sharing them. They're the backbone of the Jason Foundation. They're the ones that make our programs available at no cost to those people that we contract. As you look at the slide, and we'll say something very briefly about each one of them, you might notice that some of these are what you would call not only the top people in their industry, but very competitive people. They want to be the best. They want to be number one. And how do we get them all working together? It's because of their corporate culture that they have. They really sure, they want to be the best. They want to be number one. But they also say that we have to work together to confront this issue of youth suicide. No one organization, no nonprofit, or no any particular company by themselves could be successful in addressing youth suicide. Each one of these companies have said, we'll work with anybody that wants to help us do this. Alphabetically talking, we have Acadia Healthcare. Acadia Healthcare is located in Franklin. It is the management people out there we have worked with for years, some of the most passionate, dedicated people for mental health treatment. It's one of the largest inpatient behavioral health care organizations in our nation today, and we're very excited and very appreciative that they're one of our national affiliates at this time. Ardent Health Services goes back to 2001 with us. Ardent is working with us on an exciting program of using med-surges, not just behavioral hospitals. If you'll see some of the stats that are coming out about suicides that happen after a stay in the emergency room, we're wanting to work on that and try to use emergency rooms as an educational portal, not only to identify someone who might be there and having issues now, but also to help that person maybe in the future recognize some issues. So Ardent is working with us mostly out in the western states, but a very important part of our family. We also have E4 Health. As it says here, they're one of the nation's leading providers of wellness and employers assistance programs, EAPs. They're the backbone behind our Carl line, behind a lot of our technology. A lot of our programs have a backup that you'll see that provides clinical backup to the program, and we're very glad to have someone like E4, a leader in the nation, be that person for us. And of course, here in our own Nashville, HCA came on with us in 2013, one of the world's largest hospital chains that are out there. It says here, approximately 4 to 5% of all inpatient care is delivered through an HCA facility. A tremendous amount of work that we can do through their behavioral hospitals, but just like with Ardent, we're looking at how to use those massive amounts of ERs and med-surges also to deliver programs in the community. So when we put those together with people like our awareness affiliates, the American Football Coaches Association, they've been working with us since 2004. They have been very instrumental. We have at least one major coach in every state, and those coaches help us with PSAs, especially helping us with our programs for those 10th, 11th, and 12th grade young males who think that they're indestructible. When they listen to me, they don't maybe put too much credence, but you have a Les Miles or a Nick Saban or a Mac Brown or someone like that stand up and say, if you're really a friend, you're going to learn these things so that you can help a friend who might be having issues. It really helps us tremendously in our outreach and getting to the people we need to get to. The Arena Football League has been with us for about 3 years, reaching a whole new segment of the football family. We're very appreciative. Each one of the teams have worked with us individual as well as with the Arena Football League as a whole. And our attorney generals are very important to us. They help us get to the right people in a state. We have around 42 to 43 AGs at all times that work with us. They're so important on our national board. We have 3 attorney generals that are on our board, and we have the former U.S. Attorney General on our board. So they do a tremendous amount of getting us to the right person. And what's the most important people we work with is some of you in this room, some of those people that will be watching this. It's the crisis intervention centers, the mental health associations, other nonprofits that are addressing youth suicide, and the law enforcement agencies. Because, as I said earlier, it's going to take all of us working together in order to be able to address this issue of youth suicide. Now let's get to what we're here to learn about. Enough about the Jason Foundation, but I wanted you to know something about who we are and where we've come from to give you this program. We've talked about youth suicide as a silent epidemic, and I think as we get through some of the stats, you'll understand why we have labeled it as a silent epidemic. In 1999, this is a photo of Dr. David Satcher, who was from 1998 to 2001, the U.S. Surgeon General in our nation. The individual that in my 17 years of working with youth suicide, I would say had done more for suicide awareness and prevention than any other individual that I have worked with. He's the one that helped craft through his office the National Suicide Prevention Strategy. You know, even though suicide across all ages had been in the top 10 leading causes of death for our nation, not just youth, but for all the age groups, suicide had never been declared a national public health issue till Dr. David Satcher in 1999 stood up and said, suicide is a public health issue, especially within our elderly and our youth, and it's an issue that we have to start addressing. That got the whole ball rolling in our nation about addressing the issue of suicide across all age groups, but particularly with the elderly and the youth populations. Our first step has to be awareness. In 2009, the World Health Organization issued a statement about suicide. It said the prevention of suicide has not adequately been addressed due basically to a lack of awareness of suicide as a major health problem. Basically what they're saying is the reason why we're not doing more about this issue of suicide is most people are not aware of how it impacts their communities, their states, or their nation. And they're right. Think about it. If you think back about someone, or maybe a personal, that you've known someone in school where their suicide happened, or in your community, the way we usually handle a suicide in communities is that we sort of bracket it off, we put it together, we have the funeral, and we try to get back to life as quickly as possible without discussing it. Our churches don't talk about it, our schools don't talk about it, our communities for the most part don't talk about it. We sort of try to forget it as soon as possible because it's in the past been one of those subjects we don't want to talk about. So because of that lack of awareness, we really lose touch with the impact. And I'll show you what I mean by the impact of youth suicide. Today, suicide now is the second leading cause of death for young people ages 12 to 18, our middle and high school students. Remember when I said in 1997 I got on the old Radio Shack computer and I typed in youth suicide? Suicide was what? The third leading cause of death, and it was for ages 15 to 24. And we're going to look at that full age group in a minute. But think of this now. If you have a son or daughter or a brother or sister or someone that you know, someone that's one of your students that's ages 12 to 18, the second most likely thing in our nation to take their life today is suicide, only surpassed by unintentional injuries. Number 1 is a group, number 2 through 10 are single items. Unintentional injury. What's an unintentional injury?
Cancer.
Cancer. It would be a disease. It could be drug overdose. It could be a car accident. We've even had accidental gunshots as put down as this. You put all those together, and then you have something that takes more lives than suicide in the 12 to 18-year-old group. When you look at the particular age group of 18 to 22, basically our college-age youth, suicide is now the third leading cause of death for our college-age youth, only surpassed by number 1, unintentional injuries. Number 2 in this group is homicides, but there's so fewer homicides than in aggregate numbers than suicides that this number goes back and forward. It can go to the second, to the third, but as now it's positioned at the third, so there's some bright light, but we hope we can keep it going that way. Only surpassed, I said, by unintentional injuries and homicide. However, when you look at the new age group, The group that we used in 1997 with Samson, the CDC, was basically when they talked about youth, they used 15 to 24. Now they use a new age group, 10 to 24. When we look at that group, suicide overall is the second leading cause of death for our young people ages 10 to 24, only surpassed by unintentional injuries. And that we bring in an age group of the 10 to 14. 10 to 14-year-olds are one of the faster growing percentages group in our nation as of this year in suicide attempts and suicide. So when we put all those together, you can see that when we're talking about our young people as a group, 10 to 24, the second most likely thing to take their life in our nation today is suicide. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide than from all these causes put together. Basically, and I'm not going to read them, but you can take most all natural causes, as you talked earlier, cancer, leukemia, AIDS, stroke, chronic lung disease, birth defects, take all of those and put them together, and we lose more teenagers and young adults to suicide than all of those deaths put together. And the reason I use this slide, I had a parent come up to me after using this slide on one presentation and said, "Clark, I really didn't care for that slide. I thought my son died from a cancer, a leukemia." And he said, "I really think that you sort of put him down and try to lift up suicide prevention over it." And I've since that way, I've always defined this slide. This slide is not to put down any of those causes. If you lose a son or daughter to any of those, it is a tragic thing. We should be doing everything that we can to make sure that no one that dies from a cancer or leukemia or AIDS. We should be doing everything we can for birth defects. But this is a slide to show you that relatively speaking, we are doing a lot for those others. There's millions and millions of dollars being spent annually, as it should be on those things. But there's very little that our nation historically has done in youth suicide awareness and prevention, compared especially to the research and the monies being spent on that. But when you look at the fatalities, we lose more people to suicide than all of those combined. So it's a thing of saying that where are our priorities as a nation, where we are centering our things, not to take away from them, but to raise up the work that's being done in youth suicide awareness and prevention. One of the questions we always like to ask is, in the United States, how many young people we lose per week in our nation? Do we have any guesses? How many people you think we lose in a week? I know this would be hard to guess. I'm going to cheat and give you the answer. We're losing approximately 100 young people each and every week in our nation to suicide. Now, we can look at different studies, and it depends on what age groups you cut it off at. We've seen estimates anywhere from 35 up to 6,000 or 7,000. But let's say just use 100 per week as a good average. 100 young people that is something that's a tragedy for our nation today. To say that every week we're averaging 100 young people lost to this terrible silent epidemic of youth suicide. I like to think about this and in comparison about what we're doing and what we should be doing. Let's use for an example what we would call, what if we had a virus? Let's call it Virus A. Virus A was attacking our young people across our nation, ages 10 to 24. Didn't matter whether you were white, black, whether you were Asian, Latino, didn't matter whether you were from New York, California, Florida, or Tennessee. But every week, and it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, but every week on Friday night, the news anchor would get up and say, "This week, Virus A took 100 young people. This week it took 102, it took 98, but every week we were averaging 100 young people, ages 10 to 24, across our nation being lost to this Virus A." What do you think would be the number one subject for our leaders in our nation today? Whether it goes from the president to our senators, to our congressmen, to our local governors, to our mayors, what would be the number one issue? It wouldn't be terrorism, as bad as that is and as much as we have to address it. It wouldn't be the budget, as much as we have to stay on top of it, or the economy. It wouldn't be any of those things, even though each one of those are important for our nation today. It would be, what are you doing to stop Virus A before it takes my son, my daughter, my grandson, or granddaughter? Well, it's not a virus, but the fatalities and the impact on our communities is just the same. 100 young people each and every week now being lost to the silent epidemic of youth suicide. In the past 40 years, youth suicide rates have more than tripled, while it's been remained relatively the same for all age groups except for the elderly. and the elderly has also seen almost a comparison type of rise in suicide rates as the young people have. Let's look at some facts about suicide. Girls attempt suicide 3 times as often as boys. Now, you see the why there, and usually when we have time, I go around the room and ask, why do you think this? But again, I'm going to cheat for you and give you some answers on it. You know, why they attempt, I've heard things like girls are more in tune with their feelings. They're more emotional. They're more apt to act on their emotions. There's all of these things, and probably there's some truth to that. But when we want to get down to it, clinically speaking, why do girls attempt 3 times often than boys? We don't know. However, boys complete suicide 4 times as often as girls. Now keep this slide and the next one and the next one in mind. First of all, how many young people are we losing per week in our nation? 100. Think about it. We're losing 100. Girls are attempting at a rate 3 times greater than boys. However, boys are completing suicide 4 times higher than girls, and the results of that is 100 young people per week. Why do boys complete suicide 4 times as often as girls? We do have the answer there. Choice of means. Historically, girls have chosen drugs as a method for suicide attempts. And drugs many times will give you an opportunity to intervene. Sometimes that intervention might be minutes or hours, or in some cases, depending on the drug, can be as late as the next day that you can intervene successfully. Boys have chosen firearms historically. Firearms very seldom give you a second opportunity or an opportunity to intervene in that attempt. So because of choice of lethality, choice of means, we have, although girls are attempting it 3 times higher than boys, boys are completing 4 times higher than girls, and we're losing 100 young people per week in our nation to suicide. However, there is a recent trend. It's called a recent trend, but actually the Jason Foundation, along with some other people we worked with, saw this starting to change in 2001, 2002, because of the behavioral hospitals that we work with and the people that would see the results of suicide attempts. For some reason, and we don't know why, for some reason girls started to change to more lethal means, specifically suffocation, hanging. They went from their usual attempts of using drugs to a more lethal means of suffocation and hanging. Now remember, girls are attempting how much higher than boys? 3 times higher. What happens, and please, I don't like to use these terms because especially in the field of suicidology, we like to be more sensitive, but I'm just going to say, what happens when the girls who were attempters now start becoming victims in statistics of being a completed suicide? What happens to that 100 per week? It's going to go up, going up. And that's what we're experiencing in our nation today in 2014. We saw it in 2013, 2012. We saw that the rate of suicide was starting to increase for the first time in 15 years, primarily because of girls ages 10 to 19, and primarily because of the choice of means, hanging. And if we see this continue, we're going to see that 100 per week. Even if we can hold all the other stats in check, if we can keep them from increasing, we still going to see more suicide deaths, just because people who once were attempters are now going to be sadly called those people who completed or now a statistic of youth suicide. This number is something that's, especially while we're talking to people who are going to be teaching, people who are working with young people, we want to help all young people, but particularly now we're seeing a big opportunity to help girls in ages 10 to 19. Just as a side note, we're also now seeing boys starting to change their choice of means. Again, why? I wish I could tell you. It would help us. They're changing from firearms. Firearms use is coming down in our nation for males. And number one, it's being replaced by hanging. So this is something that really concerns those of us that are working in the youth suicide prevention field. We really don't know why there's a shift here, but we do see it. But it's important as those people who are trying to learn how to identify and help know that the means are starting to change, both for the girls and for the young men. We're going to deal with something now. If you're here in our audience today or watching this future, if you don't know about this as a resource, you need to glean this resource, write it down, and be able to get a hold of it. It's called the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. It's done by the Center for Disease Control. along with each particular state Department of Education or Department of Health, Department of Mental Health. It doesn't deal just with suicide. It deals with a vast array of subject matters for young people. It talks about possible things of school violence, of carrying weapons on school, drugs, alcohol, almost anything that you can think about that would affect a young person's life. They have a survey in there, and it's a very good survey that's done by professionals. So this is something that you can utilize as a teacher or as a person who are working with young people. A lot of good information. It's done every 2 years. The most recent one, which is the one we'll be looking at, was done in 2013 and released in 2014. So this is the most current stats that are out there. It does, however, have 4 questions that deal with suicide. We use these when we open a community resource center, when we go into a state to work, because it will show us where we need to center our resources in order to make the greatest impact in youth suicide awareness and prevention. And I want to go over those 4 questions with you. The first question is, have you felt sad or hopeless every day in a row for a period of greater than 2 weeks so it affected your usual activity? A very long question, but what's that a question for? Depression. Depression, you're right. It can actually be considered the definition of what could be considered as the beginning of clinical depression. That thing that you just can't pull yourself up by the bootstraps, hit yourself on the chin, or say, I just got to get tougher. A lot of times with clinical depression, you need help. You need someone that helps you, whether it's a therapist or even a doctor. Medication might be necessary. In our nation, 29.9% of our kids said that they had felt this way, not in their lifetime, but in the past 12 months. And we all know that depression is one of the leading causes of suicide attempts and suicide for all age groups. The second question is, have you seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months? Nationally, 17% of our young people reported they had felt that way. Again, not in their lifetime, but in the previous 12 months. That's basically 1 out of every 6 students got to a place in the past 12 months that they would report they seriously considered suicide. Now, if you're watching this or if you're in our audience, you probably say, well, Clark, that's a lot of young people. And when they reported they seriously considered suicide, it was probably because something that was very highly emotional happened in their life or something bad happened in their life. And they would say, yes, I remember that going on in the last 12 months, and I seriously thought about suicide. And they really wasn't intent on doing that. If you told me that today, I'd say, you know, you're probably right. You're probably right. A lot of those young people who reported they seriously considered suicide, it was because of an event in life. But yet we still have to take all of those seriously, because we're not sure whether it was just because they were concerned about an event or they were very, very seriously thinking about suicide. So this is still one that steps out and gets our attention when we look at a state. How many young people say they seriously considered it? But it also takes us to our third question. Our third question is, have you made a plan on how to commit suicide in the past 12 months? Now, this is a very important question. Those people who will be watching this who are counselors or people that are going to be counselors, you know that if you're sitting down and you're working with a young person or any age group person, and a person that you think that might be a concern for hurting themselves, somewhere in that initial session, you're going to ask a question: Have you made a plan on how you would kill yourself? Do you know when and how and where? Will you say, I know where the gun is, I know where the ammunition, I know where the pills are, I know when mom and dad will be gone? You've made a plan. If you're talking with someone and they've made a plan, you've gone from a time of concern to a time of crisis, because a suicide attempt is very, very likely to happen with someone who has made a plan. That's why this is an important question, because we're going from, hey, I'm concerned that they've been considering it, now to a situation where there needs to be some action. They've made a plan. Nationally, 13.6% of our young people reported they had actually got to a place in the past 12 months that they made a plan to commit suicide. How, when, and where. Basically, almost 1 out of every 7 of our young people across our nation got to a point where they planned their own suicide in the past 12 months. Our last question, have you attempted suicide 1 or more times in the past 12 months? Again, not in your lifetime. Nationally, 8%. Almost 1 out of every 13 young people got to a point in the past 12 months where they reported that they actually attempted suicide. Now, there's a phrase you can use here that if you use it, you'll never be my friend. I'm sort of a very easy guy to get along with. But there's one thing I can't stand. It's a phrase I've even heard professional use, because when you look at this, you say, gee, Clark, that's a lot of kids. A lot of kids that are reporting. First of all, I'll remind you, these are not the Jason Foundation statistics. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and each state's Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Mental Health, depending on how they do their survey in their states. All of those combined together. So it's your kids, your grandkids, and the CDC putting these together. 1 out of 13. You might say it's still a high number. Some of those were, and here's the phrase, half-hearted suicide attempts. I can't stand that phrase. Half-hearted. I wish my son would have made a half-hearted suicide attempt. It's somebody where we're saying because they wasn't intent on doing that. They didn't go to extreme means, so we call it a half-hearted. First of all, anyone who attempts to hurt themselves, no matter how minor, has to be taken very seriously. Very seriously. There's no such thing as a half-hearted suicide. Any attempt at someone hurting themselves is a cry outward. You know, I've literally talked to hundreds of young people who have attempted suicide over the past 17 years. Hundreds. And they all have two things in common, without exception. The first thing they have in common, I have never talked to anyone that had attempted suicide who in the end said, yes, they really wanted to die. That's sort of unique, isn't it? You're talking to someone who's attempted suicide, but I'm telling you, not a single one of them wanted to die. And I would say that without exception, that they didn't want to die. But the second thing was also something that was with each one of those. They had a pain in life that they had been trying to handle. They might have tried a lot of things to handle that pain. And it finally got to a point where they were willing to die for that pain to go away. So they didn't want to die, but they were willing to die because of that pain. And that's what we have to start to address. No matter how silly or how small that pain might be to you and I, we have to take those seriously. We have to take what some people would call half-hearted suicide attempts seriously, and we have to address that. And we'll see why when we start talking about previous suicide attempts at a future slide. If we want to take those youth risk behavioral survey numbers and put them to our student population, our 7th through 12th grade populations in America, we can look at, if nothing is done differently, what can we expect over the next 12 months? We can expect over 6.6 million kids could be determined as in the beginning stages of depression or clinical depression. We'll have 3.7 million kids actually seriously consider suicide over the next 12 months. Out of that, 3 million will go as far as to make a plan. And from that, 1.76 million young people will attempt suicide. That's an average of 4,840 kids each and every day, a statistical average, that will get to a point in their life where they will attempt suicide. So you see why we call it a silent epidemic in our nation today. What about our state? And I wanted to put this slide in because we're here in Tennessee talking today, but there'll be people from all across the United States watching this. And as we said, this one that we've used for the nation is also available for 42, 43 individual states. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this online or doing one of our DVDs, that you would take the time to find out about your state. Go to the Center for Disease Control and you can simply look for the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. Make sure you get the most recent one. They list all of them there. Or you can actually just search, use your search engine and say Youth Risk Behavioral Survey, and it will show you all the most recent ones. You can then proceed to the one that talks about your state, and you can get those same 4 questions that you can compare your state to the nation. It's a very useful tool. And again, not only for youth suicide, for a lot of issues that affect our young people, a very good study. So I wanted to be able to share this with those people, not only participating today, but those that will be participating through our online or DVD across the nation. So you can find out for your own state how those 4 questions impact your young people. Most people would be saying, though, I didn't realize that suicide was such a problem for our youth today, just from what we have shared so far today, with it being the 2nd leading cause of death, with it being the 3rd leading cause of death for our young people, for our college-age youth, but when you look for 10 to 24, the 2nd leading cause. We didn't realize we lost 100 young people per week to this silent epidemic of youth suicide. I didn't realize it was such a problem. But we'd follow that with this question, but what can we do? What can we do? Suicide is such an impulsive thing. You know, this is a myth that we want to put our arms around as communities, as states, as even schools and churches individually, we love to hold on to this myth, to say that suicide's impulsive, therefore there's nothing we can do about it. Do you know why we like that myth? Because it resolves us of what we feel like would be responsibility. There can be a suicide happen in our community, in our school, in our state, in our nation, and we don't feel responsible because why? There's nothing we could have done about it. It was impulsive. It was that thing that happened after that fight or after that breakup or after being grounded. We can go on and on and on about those excuses or those reasons that we've heard about committing suicide. But we really like to hold on to this one because we say that it's impulsive. However, the facts show differently. An important finding, 2 major studies came out with the same results. 4 out of 5 young people who will attempt suicide will give clear warning signs before the attempt. That's important enough for me to say again. 4 out of 5 young people who will attempt suicide will give clear warning signs before the attempt. And we don't mean necessarily just minutes before the attempt or hours before the attempts. Those warning signs can be days, weeks, even months before the attempt. 4 out of 5 show those warning signs. What does that mean? That means in 80% of the suicide attempts, we have an opportunity to intervene and make a difference. 80% of the time, if we know what to look for, if we understand what those warning signs are, if we know how to identify those and how to react to those warning signs, you and I have an ability to make an impact on 80% of the suicides or suicide attempts that are a great deal more than those 100 per week that we're losing. We have an opportunity to make a difference. The first action that we have to have is to increase awareness. And that's what we're doing today in our live presentation and for those watching online and for our DVDs. We increase awareness for seminars like we're doing today through news media, through church-sponsored programs, civic organizations, even legislation that are dealing with our schools and training our teachers. All of these things are helping us raise the awareness because if you're not aware of a problem, you're not certainly looking for the warning signs or how to intervene. But secondly, we have to learn the warning signs. We have to, for prevention, work with education. It's my opinion that education is the building block, the foundation block for building a successful suicide prevention program, or for that fact, for any type of prevention program. Education creates that foundation, the base for prevention. So let's talk about what we can do in education. First of all, it's important not to normalize this. If you're taking this information, you plan to use it out, you plan to help teach other students or teachers about this. One of the things we always want to preference is you don't want to normalize this as we're talking especially to young people. You don't want to say or phrase it or frame it in a way that it looks like this is something everybody's doing. Because even though 1 out of 13 are attempting suicide, what does that mean? 12 out of 13 is not. But however, 8% is too high of a number. We can't accept that. So we have to realize the impact is too great while at the same time not normalizing it so that it seems like it's a fact that everybody's doing this. It's a fad. In education, I want to talk today about 4 different areas: dispelling myths, learning the warning signs, elevated risk groups, and building action plans. And we're going to hit all of these within about 30 minutes. We have other programs and other training sessions that will go into a lot more depth on these. But we wanted to give you a general awareness, a general sort of tour of this education of hitting these 4 sections. And they'll be gone into deeper in other training sessions. But let's look at them one by one. Dispelling myths. This is something, especially when we started the Jason Foundation from 1997 through the 2001, 2002, the myths were rampant. There were all kinds of things going out there. One of them was a major one, which we're not seeing as often now, but it's still out there. Talking to someone about suicide will put the thought in their head. Have you ever heard that? Oh, gee, in the early years, especially the early 2000s. That's what I heard a lot from educators, a lot from people that were working with young people, that we can't talk about it, Clark. I'm sorry about your loss, but we can't talk about it to our students because we'll put the idea in their head. And it wasn't because these people were bad people. That's what they had been brought up to learn. But I haven't even met a bad psychiatrist that believes that one. Talking about it has been proven only the other way. Talking about it in a professional, upfront way is only shown to be a positive factor, not a negative, not to put the idea in someone's head. We've thought about that. When I was coming up through school, and I won't say what year that was, when I was coming up through, we had another silent epidemic called teen pregnancy. Teen pregnancy was really a big problem when I was in middle and high school. It was something that the way we handled it then, a girl was in school on Friday. On Monday, her locker was cleaned out and she was gone. She had gone to live with her aunt, with her grandmother. That's all we ever heard about if we heard anything. We didn't have the nurseries. We didn't have the care system. We didn't have anything to do to help keep them. They were simply sent away, sent away. I can remember my earlier years, and I'm not sure other states that are watching this was the law, but it was in Tennessee, that if a teacher became pregnant and she started to show, if she was tenured, she got to take a leave of absence. If she wasn't tenured, she had to quit her job and hope that it was available after the birth of her child. The reasoning for this, and I'm paraphrasing in my own opinion, what we thought was if our students don't see the results of sex, they'll never think about it. We won't put the idea in their head. Didn't work too well, did it? It was only until we started addressing it professionally, started talking to our young people about it, did we see the rates of teen pregnancy start to go down. It's the same way for youth suicide. We have to treat our young people as young adults as they are. We have to provide them the information, tools, and resources to know that this is a danger, not only to themselves, but to their friends, and to equip them not to be counselors, but to be able to recognize those and be able to know how to, within their school, within their community, get a friend help who might be struggling with suicidal information. So the first myth is talking to someone about suicide will put the idea in their head is just a myth. Someone who often talks about suicide is not a risk. Somebody who talks about killing himself, you don't have to worry about it. I've heard that one many a times. Why? We don't want to believe it. Because if we believe it, if somebody says, I'm going to kill myself, and we believe it, what does that mean? I've got to do something. I've got to take some risks myself. I've got to help this person. Wonder if I do the wrong thing. We would rather do nothing than do the wrong thing. So someone who talks about it, yes, if you know someone who's talking about suicide, who's talking about dying, you need to take action. You need to take that very seriously and get that person help. Tell them you're there for them. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't try to be that counselor, but say, I'm here with you. We need to talk to someone. Make sure that person gets help. And the last one we've already talked about, suicide is impulsive and there's nothing we can do about it. That's a myth, as we know. 4 out of 5 young people will show clear warning signs before the attempt. We just got to know how to recognize those and how to respond. Now, I will say that if we recognize 4 out of 5 will show signs, what does that mean? 1 out of 5 can be impulsive. 1 out of 5 can be that person that everything's going so good in their life. They've never had any thoughts of suicide, never had any problems, and something happens and impulsively they commit suicide. So that is something. 20% of the time that's there, but 80% of the time, if we know what to look for and how to respond, we have an opportunity to make a difference. The signs of concern are what, as we say here, many times are referred to as warning signs. Most people call them warning signs. The Jason Foundation is a little different. I don't like to call it warning signs. I'd rather call them signs of concern. And why do I differentiate that way? Because if you say warning, a warning sign it means if you see this, then this is going to happen. With these, you can see this and this might happen. That's why I call it a sign of concern. Because some of those are really signs of adolescence. What we have to look for is how they come back up into numbers. So we don't like to use warning signs, although the majority of people do. I like to call them signs of concern. You see these things, it's a reason for you to say, I'm seeing this, so suicide can be an outcome. Suicide ideation, or the thinking about it, can be an outcome. And so we take these, especially if you see them in combination. But let's look at a few of them. Remember, I think also as we look at these, that many of these warning signs / signs of concern can be considered part of normal adolescence unless they persist over a long period of time, or there's several of them present at one time, or the behavior is totally out of character for how you know the young person. Especially when you start seeing these in combination, the risk factors go up. Let's look at some of those signs of concern, and we're going to look at 5 of them briefly today. This is not an exhaustive definition or defining of each one of these, but simply letting you know in a general way what you can look for as some of the general ones. Suicide threats. Now, it can be as obvious as some young person coming up to you and telling you they're going to commit suicide. You'd be amazed at how many times that happens. I'm going to kill myself. We have to respond to, even though the majority of people we hear say that really don't mean it. I don't know whether it's 99 out of 100 or 98 out of, but the majority of them won't mean that. But when we hear that, we have to take the responsibility to react to it. Somebody you hear says, I wish I was dead, I'm going to kill myself. You need to stop what you're doing and say, what did you just say? You're not thinking about hurting yourself. I can tell you most times they're going to say, no, I just upset is the expression. But what happens if they ever really think that and you haven't responded in that positive way? They're going to think nobody really does care. So it can be something, I'm going to kill myself, I'd be better off dead. Nobody would miss, have you ever heard someone, nobody would miss me if I wasn't here? That's a suicide threat. Nobody would miss me. Nobody cares if I'm alive. Those are all types of way of expressing a suicidal threat. And we have to take each and every one of those seriously, and we need to respond to them in a positive way of making sure that individual knows we took what they said seriously and we're there to help them, and that is not the right answer to whatever they might be considering or looking at. Previous suicide attempts. 1 out of 3, it said, completed suicides are not the first attempt. This is a different statistics for age groups. I've seen it anywhere from 30% to 50%. But what we have to say is previous suicide, no matter which one of those stats it is a major concern. And the reason we bring this up, especially for our teachers who are watching this or participating, a lot of times a teacher will understand that there's been a previous suicide. A student will tell you about one. You bring a student in, you ask them, and they say, yes, I did do something like that, but I was just upset. I'm never going to do it again. I promise you I'll never do it again if you just won't tell anybody. And the teacher goes, okay, if you promise me, I'm not going to tell anybody. I can't tell you how many times we've been there then after the fact that there's a suicide. Never keep a previous suicide attempt quiet. Never keep it a secret. Always, if it's a student, get the parents involved. Get the friends involved. Get a professional help. Get someone there to let them know that there was a suicide attempt. Because when you see that even at this stat, 1 out of 3 is not the first attempt, it's saying that we're missing a big warning sign when somebody has already attempted, especially if we have it one of those, remember that phrase, half-hearted suicide attempts. We have to take each one of them serious. Never keep a secret from parents or school officials. Depression is a tough one. Even though it's one of the leading causes of suicide attempts and suicide for all age groups, it's a tough one because it exemplifies itself in so many different ways. Some people who are depressed will eat everything that doesn't move fast enough out of their reach. Other people who are depressed don't eat at all. Some people who are depressed sleep all the time. Some people who are depressed don't sleep. So it's a very hard one. That's why we tie it to the out of character one, which is the next one. Out of character behavior. If someone you know is acting totally out of character for how you know him or her, very loud, outgoing person becomes very quiet and withdrawn. A very withdrawn person becomes very outgoing and very loud. Someone stops caring about their appearance. Their grades are dropping. You can go on and on. Really, just without trying to hit all the different scenarios, if it's out of character for the person as you know him or her, does it mean that they're suicidal? No, it does not. But it does mean that if you've noticed it, it should be a time when you sit down with that friend, that you sit down with that student, that you sit down with that young man or woman and you say, listen, I see something that concerns me. I see a behavioral change in you. I see this out of character. I see some of these other things, maybe suicidal threats that they've made. Nobody would care. These things concern me. I have to ask you a question. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? You'd be amazed at how many times you ask that, somebody will say, yes, I am. And it gives you the opportunity to act and get that young person help. So out of character behavior. And then, of course, final arrangements, giving away prized possessions. It used to be something that we only saw the females doing, the girls doing, but now it's something boys are participating in. One of the recent methods was giving away your driver's license, to walking up and saying, here's my driver's license. Be amazed how many people would take it and so, thanks, I appreciate it. Now I got 2. Instead of asking somebody, why are you giving that to me? We always tell our parents as well as young people when somebody gives their son or daughter, or if you're a young person yourself and somebody gives you a prized possession, always ask them why. Thank them. Now, they might just be wanting to give you a great prize. They might be wanting to give you something very meaningful that they want you to have. But it's always great to ask you, hey, this is fantastic. Thank you for giving this to me. Can I ask you why? Why are you giving it to me today? Because that's an awfully important question. It might be because they want to give you a good gift. It might be an answer like, I won't need it anymore. This is not something I need. And it's an opportunity for us to then say, why won't you need it? Remember those people that I talked about, the hundreds that I've dealt with, that didn't want to die. What was the other? They wanted a problem to go away. They wanted someone to help them with that problem. By giving you a prized possession, if you're my best friend and I give you something you know means the world to me, and you don't ask me why I gave it to you, what do I think? You don't even really care. And so it only substantiates what's a feeling within a person already. Prized possessions, final arrangements, we always ask why. It's important that, as we say, as we looked at these, and we've hit them very quickly, that we know that these are on some general, broad areas of concern, signs of concern. Always if in doubt, get professional help, whether it's one of these 5 or within one of these 5 or not. If you have a friend, if you have a student, if you have someone that you're concerned about, always get professional help. Elevated risk factors, we're really only going to get to be able to show them today. There's programs, as we said, we have that go more in depth of those. But we want the people participating in this basic awareness and prevention seminar to at least be exposed to it. What do we mean by elevated risk factors? What we're saying is within these groups, when we take suicide as the second leading cause of death, when we're taking it about now losing 100 young people every week, when we go into these groups, that risk of suicide is even higher than it is for our general population. And I wanted to be able to see a few of these. These are perfectionists. Those of us that have young people or a friend that you might know that always has to have the straight A's, not an A minus. There's somebody that has to be picked every time first to be on the team. The person that has to be the best at everything they do. Now, do we want to take that away from our friends or our sons and daughters and say, listen, don't be the best, don't strive for it? No, we want them to strive. Just be aware that if you have a friend or you have a son or daughter, you have a student that's a perfectionist, they are in an elevated risk group. You looked at these others, depressed teens, changes, abused, molested, and neglected. Bullying. We're coming out in this fall with a whole new program on bullying and suicide. Bullying, not only for the person being bullied, but the bullier is also at risk for suicide. Gay and lesbian youth, a very high elevated risk group within that group also. And abusers of drugs or alcohol. We sometimes try to treat them as alcoholics or drug abusers when they're really trying to do what? Self-medicate. They're trying to self-medicate what? That problem that we talked about that won't go away. Sometimes drugs and alcohol is that attempt, that final attempt before a suicide attempt. So of any of these areas that we talked about here, when you look at those, if you have someone that falls within those as a student or as a friend or as your own son or daughter, you have to know that they are in an elevated risk group because they simply find themselves as one of these. But what can you do? First of all, be aware. Learn the warning signs, but then you have to have an action plan. Be prepared to ask questions or be asked. Be prepared to go up and ask a young person or a student you might be dealing with, are you thinking about killing yourself? That's a tough question. I've been doing this for 17 years. It's still a tough question. Why is it tough? Is it because it's a hard question or is it something too personal? No, what we're afraid of is when I say, are you thinking about killing yourself? When they say yes, they've put their life in my hand. I've got to make sure they're okay. I got to make sure they're taken care of. So that's why we don't like to ask that question. But be prepared to ask the question. And the reason you can be prepared is that you've done these other things. You've got your emergency protocol. If you're a school and you're watching this, you don't have an emergency protocol, you get together and get one now. Know what the chain of command is. If a student is identified as an at-risk student, you need to have a protocol already set in motion that this is who the next person is we talk to. This is who notifies the parents. This is who brings in the school psychologists or psychiatrists if available. These are the steps we take and the order that we do it. You don't want to be deciding that when you've just decided that you've identified an at-risk youth. You need to have that already be put together. And then you have to identify staff and other resources for help. Know what resources are available in your community. Know what's not only available through the school year, but what about those summers when the kids are out that you might have one placed in your hand because of someone calling you? Know what resources are available in your community. And the last, and that even includes your crisis call centers. Crisis call, we always tell our teachers, when you list that as one of your resources, and you should do it. Very good people to turn to. But make sure you call that number once a year, because regrettably, because of the economic climate we're in, some of these, they come and go. They come in. You don't want to give someone an emergency number or be dialing it at a time you need it and it not be in working order. So once a year, at least give that emergency crisis call center a call, and when they answer, just say, we're putting you down as a resource, just want to make sure everything's all right with this number and you've got it down. And if you're a teacher, never keep a secret from a parent. Always tell the parents that if you have a child that you feel like is at risk for suicidal ideation, always get them involved. And as our basic rule to remember, if is there any doubt of a young person's intention, get professional help immediately. Remember those 100 young people that die each week from suicide? 80 of them didn't have to die. 80 of them showed the warning signs to their friends, to their teachers, to their pastors, to their parents. If we had been trained to recognize those warning signs and how to responsibly respond to those, 80 of those 100 young people should not have died this week. That's what keeps the Jason Foundation going. That's what keeps us moving, because 80 of them did. We want to save those 80. Then after we save those 80, we'll go after those 20. Those other 20 is going to be tougher. Those are some of the impulsive ones. But let's get those 80 and then we'll go after those 20 also. Step 3 is resources, and these we're going to go through pretty quickly. These are some of the resources of the Jason Foundation, but let me tell you, there's other good programs out there, from NAMI to the crisis centers to a lot of good organizations. The thing is to get one that works for your community and school and use it. But I'd like to share with you some of the resources about the Jason Foundation that we have. And we do address all 3 areas that we said are important: the youth, the parent, and the educators. Our JFI programs, and we're going to go and touch them very quickly, but we'll have one and we'll show you something for each age group. Our Promise for Tomorrow is our student-based program for middle and high schools. It is not an after-school program. It was designed by mental health professionals along with educators, along with the students themselves. And it addresses suicide in the third person. You're learning this to help a friend, not for introspection. And we think that's very important. That's the way we like to present our programs. You're learning this to help a friend. This is a very good program. It's a 3 to 5 classroom presentation. It is not your 1-hour fix-all. You can't do it in 1 hour. It's a 3 to 5 hour program. It's a very positive approach at helping young people to realize that suicide is an issue, but it's an issue that they can do something to help prevent. One of our programs that we got out is called A Friend Ask. We'll be able to, you can look at the slide and get it. It's a free download from your Apple or from your Android store. All you have to do is go to the Jason Foundation on your App Store and look for A Friend Ask, ASKS. It's a smartphone app where all the warning signs, elevated risk factors, resources, even a Get Help Now button. If you press that anywhere in the United States, you're connected to the closest crisis call center that's certified by SAMHSA as a emergency talk line for suicidal ideation. Anywhere in the United States, you push that. It'll help you help a friend. And again, it's a free app. Not only the resources, but the do's and don'ts, what to do, what not to do. Great way to keep all of it at sort of at the reach of your smartphone. In our B1 project, we already talked about it. It talks about being aware, be able, be prepared. It's under rascalflatsb1.com. It's a very positive. If your school or your church or youth organization participates, we provide all the posters, all the cards, all the information to really promote this in a very positive way. Again, we have a really short one for Rascal Flats.
We're Rascal Flats.
You know, a friend, especially an informed friend, can make all the difference in the world when we find ourselves sometimes facing difficult life challenges or situations.
That is why we have joined with the Jason Foundation to launch Be One, a program that can help you be one of those friends if needed, especially for a friend who might be finding themselves overwhelmed and even maybe considering suicide. It's easy and simple to be one, but it can be so very important, even life-saving.
We hope you will visit B1 at rascalflatsb1.com and be one. Together, we can make a difference.
Again, this is a great program you can have in your school, in your church, very positive peer support program. And our staff development is what we're doing here today. Our staff development are providing information, tools, and resources to our teachers. We do this by DVD format, by online training, and by live presentations also. We also have some of you are watching this because of an issue called the Jason Flatt Act. Its law was passed first here in Tennessee. It's now in 13 states. What it does, it requires teachers within their cycle of training, here in Tennessee is annually, to receive 2 hours of youth suicide awareness and prevention training in order to be certified to teach in their state. This is a very important law. It's one that brings it in and helps teachers not to be counselors, but to equip them with the information they need to be able to identify and know how to assist a young person within their own school protocol. So we're very excited that now, as of 2014, that it's in 13 states. We are looking at 3 other states this coming year in hope that we can get it into anywhere from 16 to 18 states within the next year or two. But it's something that's a very important legislative issue and something we hope more states will embrace. In our parent and community seminar, something that you as a school can do, your PTO, your PTA, your own church, the teaching's done by the DVD. You only have to have a facilitator, someone that will put the meeting together and will bring them together, help people break out into small groups and be able to do the program. Again, all these programs are free if we contract to do the programs with you. And our Parent Resource Program is simple, a website where most of the information we talked with is available at a click of a button that takes you to a Parent Resource Program, talks about warning signs, elevated risk factors, the do's and don'ts, and all those things. This button is free to anyone who would like to get that link for your own school's website, for your church's website. Rotarian clubs have put this on. Almost anybody can put it. It's a very great thing, and again, this is at no cost to your school or organization. And our call line we talked about earlier is our 24/7. It is not a crisis call center. It is staffed by master level degree clinicians or higher. What it is for anybody who uses one of our programs. If you have a situation or an issue and you don't know how to answer, you can't get local help on it, you call this 24/7. It's not for a diagnosis, it's not for a prognosis, but rather to help you understand what you're facing and what are some of the resources or choices that you might have in helping. And nationally, it's 1-877-778-2275 or Carl. And we say the Jason Foundation, because of our affiliations, all of our programs are provided at no cost if we contract with you to provide them. And visit us on the web, simply jasonfoundation.com. You can find out a lot more about each one of these areas and subjects. And I invite you to stay current on our statistics and things, to visit our website at any time. And our theme is keeping more than dreams alive, and we do that one young person at a time. Our corporate office, as you see, is in Hendersonville, Tennessee. As we say down south, come see us if you're in our neighborhood. Stop in. We'd love to have you come visit us. Our phone number is 888-881-2323 on a national toll-free number. Here is, and we're going to be through in about 3 minutes for those watching and those sitting here that they're doing. I always like to give you homework. And here's your homework. If you're watching, this is your homework to do at your school. You can do it in groups or do it individually. You need to go and check your school, your organization's protocol, to check with those people that are the counselors, the principal. What's our protocol should we identify a student that we think might be at risk for suicidal ideation? Have the names, the phone numbers, the school hours, even after school hours. Who can you contact if you're sitting at home and a student calls you and needs help? If you don't have one, if you don't have a protocol, work with your school in putting one together. If they can't help you, you can call the Jason Foundation, email us, and we will help you, show you examples of protocols that other schools are using. And find the contact number of your local crisis intervention center, and what did we say earlier? Call and make sure that that's still a good and valid number. Continued on our homework, I want you to go and research what we are doing here is in Tennessee. I want you to go and research your own state's youth risk behavioral survey. Go and find your state's report, cdc.com, or just simply search out Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. The most recent one as of 2014 is the 2013. And look at those 4 questions. Look at those 4 questions and how they apply to your state. So you can see in an individual way, how is suicide touching your state? And lastly, and most importantly, be prepared to act. Be prepared to take action should you have any concern about a young person's safety. Have your own plan of action, whether my school has it or whether wherever I'm at. If this comes up, if a young person is brought to my attention or a young person comes to me and they're having issues, this is how I will respond. Already have your plan of action. Don't be waiting for that situation to come and then put it together. Have your plan of action necessary. The last thing that I'm going to share with you, and it'll take 3.5 minutes to do this, but this is important. And this is for the parents. If you're not a parent, you need to put this in your back pocket. If you're not a grandparent, put it in your back pocket and use this. I will guarantee you, this is something from Clark Flat the dad to those that are watching, those that are participating that are the parents and grandparents, not so much as a teacher. We call it Project Hug. It is a thing that I will guarantee will change the relationship between you and your children. I will guarantee it or double your money back for attending this conference. Guaranteed. Which nobody is charged for that. That's why I can say this. When I used to start this Project Hug, I'd be bouncing a red rubber ball the whole time that I'm doing this. And then I would stop right here and do this. Now I'm going to pick on you because you said up front. When I did this, what did you do?
I don't imagine.
You know, what did you do?
Oh, I didn't.
You didn't do anything. That's why I stopped doing this demonstration with the red rubber ball. I was hitting people and people were getting angry at me. But then what did you say? What would you have done? You had the right answer. What would you have done? This way, right. We do this. The red rubber ball's coming in our head. We do this. Do we think about that? If you have to think about red rubber ball coming towards your head, what happens?
You get hit.
You get hit. What is this called? A reflex. A reflex. How do we get a reflex? We get a reflex by red rubber balls coming in our head, by us learning that we have to do that. And we don't think about it, it comes automatically. Project Hug builds a reflex that I call the reflex of love. You know, there's going to come a time in your son and daughter's life, or your grandson and granddaughter's life, I don't care who they are, that life as they know it is going to come crashing down around their head. They're going to really feel like maybe life's not too worth it sometimes. If they have to think about you loving them, if they have to say, I think Mom and Dad loves me, just that weight, that hesitation can be the difference in life and death sometimes. It has to be a reflex of love. Project Hug will create that reflex of love. Now, how do you do Project Hug? You go home, and first of all, you got to make sure Mom and Dad's at home, or it's kind of useless to do this. I mean, your son or daughter's at home. You sit in front of the TV and cross your legs and make sure the TV is off and have the remote in your hand looking at a blank screen. Now, when your son or daughter comes by you, they're going to look down at you and they'll probably keep walking, but they'll notice you're watching a blank screen. They can't stand it. They will be back. And when they come back, they'll go, Mom, Dad, is everything okay? This is your opportunity for Project Hug when they ask you if everything's okay. You look up at them and you pat the floor in front of you and say, will you sit down for a minute? There's something I want to talk to you about. You see, we all like to be mean to our kids. I don't mean hurtful. We like to get back at them a little bit. This is going to be one of those mean things, but one of the best things you can do too. You see why? When you ask them to sit down in front of you and you pat the floor, everything they've done over the last year that they think you don't know about crosses their mind. Everything. We've even had some heartfelt confessions at this point. I was going to tell you about that, Mom. You know? And then when they sit down in front of you, just look at them and smile. Do that to a coworker. It drives them crazy. Don't say a word, just smiling at them. Then when you've had enough fun and the sweat's beaded up on their brow, then this is the part of Project Hug that builds that reflex of love. You look at them and you say, you know, I get so tied up in life. I get worried about my house note, my job, my car note. I get worried about the economy. I get worried about all these things going on in our world. I get so tied up with my own problems that I don't stop enough to tell you how much you mean to me, how much I love you, and how whole you make my life by being my son or daughter. And I just want to tell you, you mean the world to me. Then you lean over and give them a kiss on the forehead. I don't care if you're a dad and it's your 260-pound, 6'5" son across from you. You lean over, you kiss them on the forehead and say, today I just want you to know how much I love you. And you get up and walk away. It will destroy them. They don't know. But now the key to Project Hug, if you do it one time, is hokey. They know that. Hey, they did it one. They must have been feeling bad. They must have been feeling bad. Something happened in their life. You got to do it. You don't have to do it every week, but do it often. Do it often. My oldest son is a pediatric neurologist, a doctor. You know, he knows it all now. He's a good kid. I will catch him at least twice a year. Whether I go down to his house or he comes up to ours, I will have the TV off. Now when he sees me with the remote, I can hear him start to laugh. And he hits me about shoulder level, drives me to the floor, gets on me, starts hitting me in the chest lightly, hollering all the time, "I love you too, Dad, I love you too." You know, what have I created? I've created that reflex of love. So that if the world ever crashes down around him, without thinking about it, he knows Dad loves me unconditionally. You see, Jason knew I loved him, but it might not have been unconditionally. He didn't have a chance to reflex on that. He didn't have a chance that that's who I know to. I need to go to Dad. He will understand. He knew I loved him, but it wasn't a reflex. This is something that we can do. Project Hug will change the relationship between you and your son, your daughter, your grandson or granddaughter, I guarantee you. But don't do it just one time. Make it part of a regular part of your life with them. Again, I want to thank you for allowing the Jason Foundation to present this seminar on the awareness and prevention of the silent epidemic of youth suicide. For the audience that came and participated, thank you for being here. For those that are watching, whether it's online or through our DVD session, thank you for having the interest in wanting to know more about youth suicide and to be part of the answer of preventing this silent epidemic of youth suicide. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Let's go out and save some lives together. Thank you.